Hey there, Cryptid family. If you enjoy the chills, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you're new, and hit that notification bell if you're not afraid of the whispers. I've walked through places like this before. The kind of places where the air is thick with smoke, where the ground crunches underfoot from things that shouldn't be left in the open. Places where the silence is so complete that it feels deliberate, like something is holding its breath, waiting for you to notice it. The town was dead. I knew that before I stepped past the first burnt-out car, before I saw the broken streetlights and the ash drifting through the air like slow-falling snow. But knowing didn't make it any easier. The bodies always come later. I kept my rifle low, finger off the trigger, and moved down what used to be Main Street. The buildings stood like hollowed-out husks, doors yawning open, windows shattered. A gas station had collapsed inward on itself. The pumps bent at strange angles like something had wrenched them from the ground. Everything had been left behind in a hurry. Cars sat abandoned in the road, their driver's side doors hanging open, keys still in ignitions. A child's tricycle lay overturned near the curb, one wheel spinning lazily. No birds, no animals, no movement. A ghost town in the worst possible way. The first sigil appeared on the side of an old diner carved deep into the wood. I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling the burnt edges, the lingering heat of something unnatural. A demonic marking, a sign of a contract fulfilled. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Flies buzzed around what used to be livestock, if you could still call them that. The bodies were contorted, bones snapped at angles no natural predator could manage. Some were split open, not like they had been eaten, but peeled apart with careful surgical precision. Something had taken its time. Inside a gas station, I found the first real message. Blood smeared across the walls in thick, jagged letters. Not written, but dragged by desperate hands. A single phrase. It's still here. I exhaled slowly and stepped back outside. The town square was worse. Bodies, arranged, not discarded. Their limbs twisted, posed, almost deliberate, like someone had been playing with them. The stench of sulfur thickened the air, mixing with the metallic tang of dried blood. The ground had been carved with another symbol, larger, deeper, carved into the pavement itself. I recognized the pattern. I'd seen something like this before, in the aftermath of other towns just like this one. This wasn't just a slaughter. This was a ritual. Something had come here, taken what it wanted, and left the rest behind as a message. I just didn't know who it was meant for yet. The church was still standing. That was the first thing that made my stomach turn. Demons don't leave places of worship untouched unless they want to. I stepped through the heavy wooden doors. The air inside was still, wrong, thick with the scent of melted wax and something sharp and acrid, like burnt hair. The candles were still burning, rows of them lined up on the altar, flickering in the darkness. The hymnals had been torn apart, their pages scattered across the floor. And then there were the walls. Scripture, or at least something like it, scrawled in blood. Some verses were incomplete, others rewritten, twisted into something unholy. The church bell tolled once. I turned sharply, rifle raised. But the ropes weren't moving. I found him in a house near the outskirts. He was slumped against the wall, body thin, shaking, his skin the sickly color of someone who had seen too much and survived against his will. His lips moved, but I couldn't make out the words. I crouched in front of him, careful not to startle him. His eyes twitched toward me, but they didn't really see me. "Hey," I said quietly. "What happened here?" His breathing hitched, his fingers clenched against his knees, his lips cracking as he tried to form words. I leaned in closer. At first, it was nonsense, incoherent, broken mutterings, things that didn't connect. But then, his voice hitched, and for the first time, I saw his eyes truly focus. And he spoke. "The devil walks among us." My stomach dropped. Then, from outside, a sound. Not the wind, not an animal, something breathing, watching. I rose slowly, stepping onto the porch. The wind had picked up, but not naturally. It moved in a circle, carrying whispers on its current. The air felt wrong, charged, like something was waiting. I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there, it had been expecting me. I didn't sleep, not that I expected to. The town lingered behind me, a silent graveyard under the moon's pale glow. It was always like this, the aftermath, the quiet, the lingering feeling that something had been left unfinished, but the demon was gone. And I had a trail to follow. The road stretched ahead, cracked and uneven, flanked by trees that looked as if they had been twisted into place rather than grown naturally. The silence wasn't comforting. It pressed against me, filled my ears, crawled along my skin. The stench of sulfur and rot still clung to the air, faint but persistent. I followed the signs, burned out patches of earth, unnatural claw marks carved into asphalt, abandoned cars that had been torn apart rather than left behind. Something massive had come through here, and it hadn't been subtle. But there were no bodies. That part sat wrong with me. The town behind me had been littered with corpses, but here, nothing. Like they had been taken, or worse, like they had never been here at all. I spotted the first real clue an hour down the road. A farmhouse collapsed inward, its roof caved in like something had dropped onto it from above. I moved carefully, rifle raised, checking the perimeter. No movement, no noise. But something was here. The air inside was thick, not just with dust, but something heavier. It settled in my lungs, made the space feel smaller than it was. That's when I saw the walls. Symbols, dozens of them, carved deep into the wooden beams, overlapping, frantic, desperate. Some were unfinished, as if whoever had been writing them hadn't had time to finish. I reached out, running my fingers over the grooves. The edges were still warm. Then I saw the claw marks. Not scratches, not a struggle. Something had reached through these walls, not from the outside, but from within. I backed away slowly, stepping over a pile of clothes. At least I thought they were clothes, until I saw the teeth, the remnants of something that had been a person, but not anymore. I exhaled through my nose and kept moving. I used to think tracking these things was just about following the destruction, but sometimes the destruction wasn't the real story. Sometimes it was the absence. I kept walking. The night stretched long, the road shifting between shadow and pale moonlight. My mind wandered, not by choice, but by habit. Memories of the first town I had ever found like this. The first time I was too late. A woman clutching her child, both of them left like dried-out husks, their expressions frozen mid-scream. I had been younger then, stupid enough to think I could have done something if I had just arrived a little earlier. I knew better now. The demon left when it wanted to, not a second sooner. And yet that thought did nothing to loosen the knots in my stomach. I reached an old rest stop around midnight. A single gas station, long abandoned, the neon sign hanging by a thread. The windows were smashed in, the door barely on its hinges. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, like something had been burned away, but not completely. The shelves were overturned, bags of stale chips spilling onto the tile. Then the sound, a phone, ringing. I turned slowly, eyes locking onto a phone in the farthest corner of the store. It wasn't plugged in. It rang again. My hand hovered over my gun, but I didn't draw. I had played this game before. I stepped closer. The phone stopped ringing the moment I reached for it. A low, static hum filled the receiver, followed by a sound like breathing. Then, "Lucas Moore, you're already part of this." The voice was distorted, layered, like multiple voices speaking over each other. The lights flickered, the air shifted, the temperature dropping just enough to make the sweat on my neck turn ice cold. I didn't respond, didn't move, just listened. The whispering didn't stop. It got closer. I turned sharply, rifle raised. Nothing, just aisles of rotting snacks and overturned shelves. Then the radio behind the counter crackled to life, voice warping between stations. "You're close. You know that, don't you?" I exhaled slowly, backing toward the door. The static surged, filling the space, vibrating against my skull. Then, silence. I stepped outside. The wind had picked up, but not naturally. It moved in a pattern, swirling in unnatural directions. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I reached the outskirts just before dawn. This one was different. The lights were still on. No destruction, no overturned cars or collapsed buildings. But the air felt wrong, like it was waiting. I took a slow step forward, my boots pressing into dirt that felt too soft, too loose. Then the wind carried something through the trees, a sound I recognized immediately. Not speech, not a scream, something deep, rumbling, breathing. The demon wasn't gone. It was ahead of me. And this town was next. I stepped into town just as the first slivers of sunlight broke over the rooftops. It looked normal. That was the first red flag. The last town had been a graveyard. This one still had people in it. But something was wrong. They were too still. Some sat on porches, rocking in silence, eyes fixed on nothing. Others stood in doorways, watching me as I passed, their expressions unreadable. Not fearful, not curious, just vacant. The only sound came from a wind chime somewhere down the road, the hollow notes barely audible over the thick silence pressing against everything. I kept walking, rifle slung tight across my chest, scanning for anything out of place. Everything was out of place. No traffic, no movement inside homes, no kids playing. The town was alive, but not living. I found the first sign inside a rundown bar. The bartender was cleaning a glass that wasn't dirty. His hands moved in slow, mechanical circles, his eyes locked on the wood grain of the counter. He didn't react when I stepped inside, didn't flinch when I dropped into the stool across from him, didn't acknowledge me at all, not until I spoke. "How long has it been like this?" His fingers tightened around the glass. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without looking up, he said, "If you're smart, you'll leave before nightfall." I watched him carefully. His breathing was steady, his hands didn't shake. But he was lying. Not about the danger, about leaving. because he knew I wasn't going to. Before I could push for more, I caught something in the corner of my eye. A kid, sitting alone in a booth near the back. She had a notebook open in front of her, the pages filled with frantic scribbles, jagged, overlapping lines, like she had been trying to draw something but couldn't get it right. I stepped closer. She looked up at me, her dark eyes wide and unblinking, and she turned the notebook around. A massive figure, towering, with curling horns, watching over the town. I crouched beside the table. "Where did you see this?" Her lips barely moved. "It's everywhere." My skin prickled, something about the way she said it. Like she wasn't talking about the past. Like she meant right now. The further I walked, the more I noticed them. Symbols, carved into door frames, scratched into windowsills, etched into mailboxes, sidewalks, even tree bark. Not warnings, markers. Some homes had them, some didn't. A pattern, a system. I found a priest inside a crumbling church, hunched over a stack of half-burned hymnals, his hands clasped so tightly together his knuckles had gone white. He jumped when I stepped inside. His eyes flicked to my rifle, then to the sigil carved into the door behind me. He didn't ask who I was, didn't ask why I was here. He already knew. "It's too late," he whispered. I sat on the edge of a pew, watching him. What do the markings mean? His face crumpled, like he wanted to cry, but there was nothing left in him to give. "Some of us were chosen," he murmured. "Some of us weren't." The weight of his words settled deep in my chest. This town made a deal. They thought it would protect them. They were wrong. Night came fast, too fast. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, the town had locked itself away. Porch lights flicked off. Curtains snapped shut. Doors slammed closed and didn't open again. The streets were empty. The silence became something heavier. Something with teeth. I stood in the center of it, watching the fog roll in from the outskirts, creeping through the alleys, swirling through the trees like it was alive. I felt the shift in the air, like a storm was coming, like something was already here. Then I heard it, a scream, sharp, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Then another, then silence. I found him stumbling down the main road, his chest heaving, his hands clutching something tight to his ribs. A man, the only one still outside. His eyes locked onto me the second he saw me, wild and desperate. "You need to go." His voice was raw, broken. "You don't understand what's coming." I took a slow step forward. "Tell me what happened." His hand shook. He looked past me, into the fog, as if something was standing there. We thought it would leave us alone. His breath hitched. We thought the deal would hold. I felt it before I saw it. The shift in the air. The sudden weight pressing down on my chest. The sense of something standing just behind me. The man's eyes went wide. His mouth opened. Then he was gone. No sound, no struggle. Just gone. The mist swallowed him, and where he had stood, there was nothing but a single blood-stained footprint. The wind whispered through the empty streets. The town was silent again. But this time, it wasn't waiting. It was hiding. And the hunt had begun. I heard the first scream just past midnight. Short, sharp, cut off before it could become something real. Then another. Then another. Then silence, not the natural kind. the uneasy quiet that settles before something terrible happens. I stood in the middle of the street, rifle raised, watching the fog spill through the town like a living thing. It crept into every alleyway, slithered under doorways, swallowed the roads whole. The streetlights flickered against it, their glow barely pushing through. Then the silence broke. A breath, deep, guttural, not human. It vibrated through the ground, rattled against my ribs, sent a slow, creeping chill up my spine. Then, in the mist, movement, something big, something coming. The hunt had begun. I pressed my back against a crumbling brick wall, listening. My heartbeat felt too loud in my ears. Then, from within the mist, a massive shifting shadow. It moved fast, too fast. I caught only glimpses, a towering figure flickering between reality and something less tangible, its body bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I forced my breathing to slow, finger resting against the trigger. A moment later, something crashed in the distance, a house tearing apart from the inside out. Screams followed, short, fleeting, gone before fear could truly set in. Then, for the first time, I saw it. It stood in the open now, fully formed, towering, monstrous, twisted. Its horns curled like jagged spires, its shoulders broad enough to blot out the buildings behind it. Its eyes weren't just glowing, they burned, flickering between shades of red and orange like smoldering embers. The ground beneath it cracked, warped, as if reality itself was rejecting its presence. And the air, it felt wrong, like something was pressing down on me, trying to crush me into the earth. I saw movement in the windows, people, still alive, still watching. They weren't screaming anymore. They weren't running. They were staring, like they had already accepted their fate. And the demon, it was savoring that. Not just the fear, the hopelessness. I aimed for the head. Then I fired. The first shot cracked through the stillness like a thunderclap. The bullet struck true, square in the forehead, just above its burning eyes. And the demon barely reacted. It tilted its head slowly, almost in amusement. The wound in its skull sealed itself instantly, as if the bullet had never been there at all. Then it turned to look at me. The fog shifted violently, rippling outward like something massive had moved beneath it. The ground beneath my feet trembled. Then the demon moved. 1 second it was 50 feet away. The next, it was right in front of me. I barely had time to dive sideways before its clawed hand came down, shattering the pavement where I had been standing. The impact sent a shockwave through the street, splintering asphalt, shaking nearby buildings. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and brought my rifle up just as its other arm swung toward me in a wide, brutal arc. I fired mid-motion, silver core rounds, blessed. The bullets hit their mark, rippling through its form like liquid caught in slow motion. For the first time, the demon jerked back, not in pain, but in acknowledgement. Then it came for me again. I turned and ran, not out of fear, out of strategy. Fighting it here, in the open, was suicide. I sprinted through the empty streets, boots pounding against the pavement. The wind howled around me, carrying whispers that weren't there before. Behind me, the demon moved effortlessly, its massive form twisting through spaces too small for it, bending the world around it like a bad dream. It was playing with me, testing me, a predator learning the limits of its prey. I needed to end this, Now, I ducked behind an overturned truck, reloading as I pressed my back to the cold metal. The demon stopped moving. I could feel it watching. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. It wasn't in a rush. It knew I had nowhere to go. I exhaled through gritted teeth, adjusting my grip. Then I saw it. The core, deep within its chest, pulsing. Not a heart, something else. I had my target. I stepped out of cover and opened fire. Bullets ripped through the fog, striking its torso, each impact sending ripples through its shifting form. Then, a hit. A shot straight into the core. The demon reeled backward, its entire body convulsing. It let out a sound that wasn't meant for human ears. The sky split open. The air shook. The ground beneath us fractured, veins of red-hot energy spiderwebbing through the pavement. Its body twisted violently, unraveling piece by piece. It was dying, and it knew it. With a final, furious snarl, it lunged one last time. I barely dodged, rolling beneath its final strike as it collapsed inward, consumed by its own unraveling contract. Then, just like that, it was gone. The mist was gone. The town was silent. I exhaled, lowering my rifle. Then, footsteps, slow, measured. I turned, rifle raised, and saw a man. He introduced himself as Eli Turner, dressed sharp, calm, unaffected. He looked past me, toward where the demon had died. Then he sighed. Well, that's inconvenient. I didn't lower my rifle. His eyes flicked toward me, amused. Relax, Hunter. If I was here for you, I wouldn't have bothered walking. He reached into his pocket and tossed something toward me. I caught it, a coin, heavy, marked with a sigil I didn't recognize. Next time, Eli said, don't kill it before we talk. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I stared at the coin in my palm. The hunt was over, but something told me that this wasn't the end.